Have you ever been on Serum messing around with FM synthesis? And you realize that instead of doing it from oscillator B, you use the sub-oscillator. It sounds way different? Well, I have, and there's a good reason for it. And that reason is something that requires knowledge about analog modulation. Focus! So the way that it works is that there's a carrier wave, which is just the normal sound that you want to modulate, and a modular wave, which you can't hear, but affects the carrier wave in different ways. What different ways? Well, there are 3 different types: frequency modulation, amplitude modulation, and phase modulation. Now those might sound complicated, but it just means that the modular wave is affecting the phase, the amplitude, and the frequency. Now what do those mean? Well, the point between here and here is the frequency and it affects pitch. The point from the top to here is the amplitude and it affects volume. And wherever the waveform starts, in this case here, is the phase. Now the way that frequency modulation works is that when the modular signal is high up, the frequency gets squished together and the pitch goes up. And then when the modular signal is lower, it gets spread out and the pitch goes lower. Now the way that amplitude modulation works is that when the modular signal is high up, the volume also stays high up. And when the modular signal is down low, the volume goes down as well. Now if you look at phase modulation, you might go and think, doesn't that look exactly like frequency modulation? And they do look similar. They sound similar as well, but they are not the same thing. Phase modulation affects the phase, or where the waveform would have started. So when the mod goes up, it pushes everything to the side, causing it to go by faster, which is why it looks like the frequency is getting higher. You'll notice that frequency modulation causes the waveform to be high-pitched when the modulator is high up, as opposed to phase modulation is high-pitched when the modulator is going up. As you can see in frequency modulation, the speed abruptly changes, in this case from really fast to really slow when there's an abrupt change. In phase modulation, the phase suddenly changes, which causes it to jump to a random point, which causes an abrupt spike in the waveform itself, as opposed to frequency modulation. Now what does all this have to do with Serum? Well, I'll show you. So as you can see, I have a Serum open, along with a wave candy, which just shows us the waveform currently being played. Now, what I have playing right now is just a simple sine wave in the first oscillator. In the second oscillator, however, I have a really slow square wave, which is just going up and down, and I have the same exact thing going on in the sub-oscillator. So these should both affect the first oscillator the same exact way. First, let's test it to make sure that the amplitude modulation works as, say, a control. So as you can see, it keeps going up and down in volume, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. Now, let's move on to frequency modulation from the sub-oscillator. As you can see, it's going from fast to slow to fast to slow, which is exactly what should happen. Now, let's try the same exact thing, except this time we're going to use the second oscillator. It's not changing in pitch. There seems to be abrupt changes in the waveform, though, happening where the clicks would happen, like the phase is changing. Interesting. Steve, Exfer, I expect a detailed apology letter in the mail, along with compensation, and for you guys to fix Serum's labeling in the newest update, or else I don't know, I'll chat passive-aggressively about Serum in public forums.